Claire and Judge Thomas Whitmore appeared to have it all, the perfect marriage, the flawless life. But when Thomas was found brutally stabbed more than 20 times in their luxury home, everything shattered. How could the elegant, charitable wife become the prime suspect? This is the story of a woman who played the perfect role until the truth pulled back the curtain in the most chilling way imaginable. Claire Whitmore was the kind of woman people admired from afar and adored up close. At 42, she carried herself with the graceful poise of her youth as a professional ballerina. After retiring from the stage, she slipped seamlessly into the role of socialite and philanthropist, spending her days organizing charity events, mentoring aspiring dancers, and serving on the boards of local arts institutions. She was the picture of elegance, always impeccably dressed, always smiling, and her charm seemed effortless. In the upscale town of Oak Hill, Virginia, she wasn't just known, she was beloved. Her husband, Judge Thomas Whitmore, was equally esteemed. A pillar of the legal community, he had spent over 20 years on the bench, handing down tough but fair sentences, earning a reputation as both principled and unshakable. He was a man who commanded respect the moment he entered a room, his presence heavy with authority. Colleagues described him as stern but brilliant, a man of routine and discipline. Together, Claire and Thomas were the couple others envied, refined, successful, and seemingly unbreakable. Their lives looked flawless. They lived in a sprawling estate nestled behind wrought iron gates at the edge of town, a home so pristine it was once featured in an interior design magazine. Claire filled it with soft classical music, fresh-cut flowers, and carefully curated artwork. The couple hosted elegant dinner parties, often attended by judges, lawyers, business owners, and high society figures. Everything about their world seemed meticulously ordered, and no one had any reason to question it. In public, they were affectionate but composed. Claire would rest her hand lightly on Thomas's arm at events, and he would glance at her with what seemed like quiet admiration. The two of them represented a kind of old-fashioned ideal, the powerful husband and the gracious wife, always in sync, always dignified. If there were ever cracks in the surface, no one noticed. And yet, as perfect as their life seemed, something felt almost too polished. Claire rarely spoke about her personal life. Despite being surrounded by people, she had few close friends. Even longtime acquaintances admitted they didn't truly know her. She appeared content, but there was a stillness in her eyes that hinted at something deeper, something carefully contained. For years, no one questioned it. Why would they? The Whitmores were a model couple, the kind people pointed to when talking about how to balance power and elegance. But behind the manicured lawns and glittering galas, a different story was quietly waiting. It would take a violent end to bring it to the surface. The morning of April 8, 2023, began like any other in Oak Hill, Virginia. Quiet, crisp, and calm, but by mid-morning, the Whitmore estate had become the center of a growing media storm. What was once a symbol of wealth and refinement had become the scene of a gruesome killing. Inside the mansion, Judge Thomas Whitmore, one of the town's most respected figures, had been found stabbed to death in his own bedroom. The scale of the violence shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The call came in just after 7 o'clock. Ayla Emin from Maria Alvarez, the Whitmore's longtime housekeeper. She had arrived as she always did, entering through the side door and heading upstairs to begin her daily routine. When she opened the door to the master's suite, she stopped in her tracks. The room was in disarray. The bedsheets tangled and soaked in blood, the side table overturned, and Thomas Whitmore lying motionless beside the bed. He had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest and abdomen, the force of the attack leaving deep, ragged wounds. Blood had splattered across the walls, the floor, and the nearby curtains. Maria ran from the house in panic, screaming for help. Police and paramedics were dispatched immediately. Within minutes, flashing lights surrounded the property. Officers entered cautiously, not sure if the attacker was still inside, but they found no one else. just Claire Whitmore, seated at the kitchen island, staring blankly ahead. She was dressed in a cream-colored robe, stained with blood. Her hands shook slightly, but she showed no signs of injury. When questioned, she claimed she had argued with her husband the night before and had gone to sleep in the guest bedroom down the hall. She said she awoke to the sound of Maria's screams and ran upstairs, where she found Thomas's body. Her voice was flat, her eyes were glassy. Officers noted that she never asked how he had died, only whether she could sit down. As police searched the house, they quickly ruled out signs of forced entry. No windows were broken, no doors tampered with. Surveillance footage showed that no one had entered or left the property after 9:03 p.m. the night before. The security system had remained armed the entire night. Claire was the only other person confirmed to be in the house. Forensics began documenting the scene. Blood patterns indicated a frenzied attack. A kitchen knife, believed to be the murder weapon, was bagged as evidence. And as investigators processed the timeline, one conclusion became unavoidable. There were no unknown intruders. There was no mystery assailant. Everything pointed to Claire Whitmore, the woman everyone believed had the perfect life. The case against Claire Whitmore began to form almost immediately, built on a series of damning discoveries made within hours of the murder. Investigators were stunned by the sheer brutality of the attack. Thomas Whitmore hadn't simply been killed. He had been stabbed 23 times in what looked like an explosion of rage. This wasn't a clean or calculated assassination. It was personal. The wounds varied in depth and angle, suggesting a chaotic struggle rather than a single decisive act. For the detectives on scene, this detail stood out. Whoever had done this had lost control. The crime scene evidence alone painted a troubling picture. The knife used in the attack was traced back to the Whitmore's own kitchen set. There were no signs of forced entry or theft, eliminating the possibility of a break-in gone wrong. Claire's robe had high-velocity blood spatter on the sleeves and collar, a detail that contradicted her claim of discovering the body only after Maria had screamed. Her fingerprints were also found on the handle of the knife, along with Thomas's blood. When questioned, Claire couldn't explain how that had happened. Investigators continued their searches. In the laundry hamper, they found a towel soaked in blood, apparently used in an attempt to wipe down the bathroom counter. It was never mentioned by Claire in her statement. A pair of rubber gloves, also stained with blood, had been tossed in the kitchen trash bin. Claire insisted she had no idea how they got there. Detectives also obtained a warrant to search Claire's phone and electronic devices. Deleted messages were recovered through forensic software. Among them were several texts exchanged with a close friend that hinted at increasing tension between the couple. One message read, "I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything's fine." Another, dated just 3 days before the murder, said, "He watches everything I do. I feel like I'm being smothered." While the texts didn't confirm violence, they introduced motive. Those close to the couple later told investigators that Claire and Thomas had been struggling behind the scenes. Their marriage, once envied, was not as flawless as it appeared. Friends had noticed Claire becoming withdrawn in recent months. She had canceled several social engagements, and her appearances at charity functions had grown infrequent. From the outside, it was hard to believe that the graceful, smiling woman who had once lit up gala nights could be capable of such violence. But behind closed doors, the pieces were beginning to fit together, and the evidence was beginning to speak louder than her silence. Claire Whitmore's arrest sent shockwaves through the small, affluent community of Oak Hill. Within hours, the story was picked up by local news stations, and by the next morning it had spread nationwide. The elegant wife of a well-known judge, now accused of murdering him in their own home, made for a headline that was impossible to ignore. Neighbors stood at the edges of their driveways, stunned. People who had once admired Claire from afar now watched footage of her being led from her home in handcuffs, head lowered, face pale, as if trying to disappear. For years, Claire had been a fixture of high society, photographed at fundraisers, art shows, and political functions. She was known for her kindness, her poise, and her tireless charitable work. To many, she had embodied grace and composure. Her marriage to Judge Thomas Whitmore had been viewed as a symbol of dignity and tradition. His reputation for strict but fair rulings, combined with her public charm, had made them a kind of local royalty. No one could comprehend how the woman who had once chaired the Oak Hill Cancer Gala could be sitting in a jail cell, accused of stabbing her husband more than 20 times. As the investigation moved forward, the prosecution worked swiftly to build its case. The district attorney's office believed they had a straightforward narrative, a woman trapped in a crumbling marriage, cut out of a newly revised will, and possibly discovering infidelity, finally snapped. According to their theory, Claire had killed her husband in a fit of rage, using a knife from their kitchen, and then tried to cover it up. The forensic evidence supported this. The fingerprints, the blood spatter, the inconsistencies in her story. To them, it seemed open and shut. Meanwhile, Claire was transferred to the Oak Hill County Detention Center to await trial. Her legal team, led by a high-profile defense attorney from Richmond, began preparing her defense quietly. They released a brief public statement, reminding the public that Claire was presumed innocent and had endured a traumatic personal loss under unimaginable circumstances. But beyond that, they said little. Claire herself refused all interviews. She spent her days reading legal documents and meeting with her attorneys, never showing emotion in public, never giving the press a moment of vulnerability. Yet behind the calm exterior, something else was brewing. Her defense team wasn't just working to protect her from conviction. They were gathering something far more powerful. The truth about what had really happened inside the walls of the Whitmore estate and what Judge Thomas Whitmore had spent years hiding from the world. The trial of Claire Whitmore began on a warm August morning just 4 months after the murder of her husband. The courthouse in Oak Hill was packed. Reporters lined the sidewalk, cameras flashing as Claire exited the police van in a simple black dress, her hands cuffed in front of her. Despite her pale appearance and frail frame, she held her head high, eyes fixed ahead. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't just a murder trial, it was a scandal wrapped in elegance and tragedy, and everyone wanted to witness it. The prosecution opened strong. They presented their version of events clearly and confidently. They described a marriage under pressure, a wife who felt powerless, and a violent act that shattered any illusion of innocence. They walked the jury through the evidence. The murder weapon pulled from the Whitmore kitchen, the robe soaked in blood, and the fingerprint analysis that placed Claire's hand firmly on the knife. The prosecutor pointed out that no one else had entered or exited the house that night. They emphasized her lack of emotion during the 911 response and questioned how she could remain so calm after discovering such a horrific scene. With the stage set, Claire's attorneys prepared to reveal the secrets that had been locked away for years. Secrets that could not only explain her actions, but change how everyone saw the man she had been accused of murdering. As the trial unfolded, the defense team began peeling back layers of the Whitmore marriage that few had ever suspected. The public had only seen the polished surface, the elegant dinners, the charity events, the graceful smiles. But beneath that veneer lay a darker reality, one that painted Judge Thomas Whitmore in a very different light. The defense called witnesses who revealed a pattern of control and intimidation masked by his respectable exterior. Former colleagues described the judge as a man who demanded absolute obedience, known for his temper behind closed doors. One staff member testified about the harsh tone Thomas used when frustrated, recounting how his rage could be sudden and frightening, though never witnessed publicly. The courtroom atmosphere shifted as these accounts contrasted sharply with the image of a revered judge. More startling were the testimonies from people who knew Claire in private. Friends shared that over recent years she had confided fears about her husband's increasingly erratic behavior. There were mentions of late-night arguments, silent dinners filled with tension, and Thomas's jealousy that grew worse as Claire sought independence. A close family friend testified that Claire had once told her, "I feel trapped, like I'm living in a cage built by Thomas." Perhaps the most revealing evidence came from a private investigator hired by the defense. After digging into Thomas's personal life, the investigator uncovered hidden bank accounts and business dealings that the judge had kept secret from Claire and the public. These funds appeared linked to questionable investments and hinted at possible corruption. The defense suggested that Thomas had spent years living a double life, one as a respected judge, the other as a man willing to break the law for personal gain. The defense also introduced correspondence from Claire's phone and journal entries recovered after the murder. They revealed a woman struggling to reconcile her love for Thomas with the fear he inspired. Entries spoke of sleepless nights, feelings of helplessness, and a growing sense of dread about what the future might hold. One journal page described a confrontation where Thomas threatened to ruin everything if Claire ever spoke out. As these revelations came to light, the jury saw a far more complicated picture. Claire was no longer just the accused killer. She was a woman trapped in an abusive and suffocating marriage, one where fear and control had eroded her sense of self. The defense wasn't just trying to explain the murder. They were showing why it had happened. The courtroom was no longer about a perfect wife accused of violence, but about a woman pushed to the edge by a man she once trusted completely. As the trial entered its critical phase, the defense unveiled what would become the most shocking twist of the entire case. Hidden beneath layers of legal paperwork and years of polished reputation, they revealed evidence of a secret life led by Judge Thomas Whitmore. A life filled with deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. The defense introduced emails and financial documents showing Thomas's involvement in a covert network of influence, peddling, and bribery. Over a decade, the judge had quietly accepted payments from local developers and business owners, seeking favorable rulings in court. These payments were disguised as charitable donations to various causes, many of which Claire had supported publicly. But behind closed doors, those donations were little more than a cover for corrupt dealing. This revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom and the wider community alike. More disturbing was the exposure of Thomas's infidelities. Text messages recovered from his personal phone revealed ongoing relationships with multiple women, some of whom were connected to people involved in cases he presided over. The defense argued that Thomas's double life extended far beyond financial corruption. It permeated every corner of his personal and professional world. Claire had been living alongside a man whose public image was a carefully constructed mask. The prosecution struggled to respond. Their argument that Claire had acted out of simple marital frustration now seemed overly simplistic. The jury learned that Claire's efforts to keep their family intact were met with manipulation and control by Thomas, who had systematically isolated her from friends and influence. Defense witnesses testified about Claire's attempts to seek help and advice, only to be met with threats and intimidation. Perhaps most powerful was the defense's presentation of expert testimony on domestic abuse. Psychologists explained how abusers often maintain a charming facade in public while exerting psychological control in private. They described the cycle of fear, isolation, and helplessness that can trap victims for years. The defense argued that Claire's actions, while tragic, were the result of years of abuse that culminated in a desperate moment. As the courtroom absorbed these revelations, the narrative shifted dramatically. The perfect wife image shattered, replaced by a portrait of a woman fighting for survival in a marriage built on lies and cruelty. The jury faced a complex decision. Was Claire Whitmore a cold-blooded killer or a victim pushed beyond the breaking point? The answer would come down to how they interpreted the truth hidden behind the judge's carefully guarded secrets. As the trial drew toward its climax, both the prosecution and defense knew the jury faced a difficult choice. The once clear story had become tangled with secrets, betrayals, and a disturbing glimpse behind the Whitmore family's polished facade. The defense team prepared their final arguments, intent on convincing the jury that Claire Whitmore's actions were not those of a cold-blooded murderer, but of a woman driven to desperation by years of psychological torment. In the closing weeks, the defense introduced a crucial piece of evidence that would tip the scales. A series of therapy records, obtained through subpoena, revealed that Claire had sought counseling for anxiety and depression in the months leading up to her husband's death. These sessions painted a picture of a woman struggling under the weight of constant fear, uncertainty, and emotional abuse. The therapist's notes described Claire's feelings of entrapment and helplessness, feelings that the defense argued had ultimately led to a breaking point. Furthermore, the defense highlighted inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline, pointing to moments when Claire's version of events, while flawed, could not be conclusively disproven. They argued that the overwhelming presence of blood and fingerprints was not evidence of guilt, but of a frantic attempt to help or defend her husband during the attack. The brutal nature of the stabbing, they claimed, suggested a sudden eruption of violence, possibly in self-defense. Meanwhile, the prosecution reminded the jury of the cold facts: the knife from Claire's kitchen, the absence of any other suspects, and the silence Claire maintained about critical evidence, such as the bloodied towel and gloves found in the house. They insisted that the only person with motive, opportunity, and means was Claire Whitmore. As closing arguments unfolded, tension filled the courtroom. The prosecution painted Claire as a woman consumed by jealousy and greed, willing to kill for control and freedom. The defense pleaded for understanding, urging the jury to see beyond the surface and consider the long history of suffering Claire had endured. Outside the courthouse, the public remained divided. Some saw Claire as a victim finally standing up against her abuser. Others believed justice demanded a conviction for the brutal murder of a respected judge. In the jury room, the weight of these conflicting views hung heavy. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that stunned everyone. Claire Whitmore was found not guilty. The decision was met with shock and disbelief by many, but for others, it was a bittersweet vindication of a woman who had played the perfect role until she didn't. The truth, hidden for so long, had finally come to light. The verdict of not guilty sent ripples through Oak Hill and beyond, sparking intense debate about justice, truth, and the complexities of domestic abuse. For many, Claire Whitmore's acquittal was a shocking outcome. How could a woman accused of stabbing her husband more than 20 times walk free? But for others, it was a powerful reminder that appearances can deceive, and the reality behind closed doors can be far darker than anyone imagines. In the days following the trial, the media frenzy intensified. News outlets dissected every detail of the case, replaying courtroom footage and analyzing witness statements. Experts weighed in, discussing how psychological abuse often leaves invisible scars that can drive victims to desperate acts. Conversations about domestic violence and the legal system's handling of such cases dominated social media and talk shows. Many people expressed newfound awareness that abuse isn't always physical, and that it can be hidden beneath layers of wealth and prestige. Claire herself maintained a low profile after the trial. She declined interviews and public appearances, choosing instead to retreat from the spotlight. Her lawyers released a brief statement thanking the jury for their careful consideration and urging society to recognize the complexities of domestic abuse. Despite her freedom, many wondered how she would rebuild her life after such a public ordeal. Friends and family who had stood by Claire during the darkest days spoke privately about the woman they knew. Someone resilient, but deeply wounded. They described her as someone who had been trapped in a gilded cage, forced to maintain a flawless image while living in fear. Now that the truth was out, they hoped she could begin to heal. The Whitmore estate, once the site of tragedy, was quietly sold months later. The neighborhood whispered about the house where the perfect marriage had shattered. For many, the property became a symbol of the hidden turmoil that wealth and status can mask. While the case inspired local authorities to reevaluate how they handled domestic abuse investigations, especially in high-profile families, advocates pushed for better training, more resources, and greater awareness of psychological abuse. Claire's trial became a case study in the complexity of victimhood and culpability, raising questions that extended far beyond one courtroom. The trial ended with Claire's acquittal. The story left a lasting impact. It challenged assumptions about crime, punishment, and the human capacity to hide darkness behind a perfect smile. In the quiet aftermath, the community grappled with the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters live not in the shadows but in plain sight. Years passed after Claire Whitmore's acquittal, but the echoes of the trial lingered in Oak Hill and beyond. The story of the perfect wife who was accused and ultimately freed became part of local lore, a cautionary tale about appearances and the secrets they can conceal. People still debated the verdict, and the case remained a touchstone in conversations about justice, power, and domestic abuse. Claire herself vanished from the public eye. She relocated quietly to a small town hundreds of miles away. Far from the glare of cameras and whispers, there she sought a fresh start, working in a modest bookstore and living a life far removed from the grandeur she once knew. Those who met her described a woman changed by trauma, but determined to reclaim her identity on her own terms. She never remarried, choosing instead to focus on healing and rebuilding the pieces of a life fractured by pain. The Whitmore estate, sold soon after the trial, was eventually demolished, its walls dismantled to erase the memory of violence. On the cleared land, a community park was built, a space meant to bring new life and hope where darkness once dwelled. The transformation was symbolic, a chance for the neighborhood to move forward while remembering the lessons of the past. The Whitmore estate, sold soon after the trial, was eventually demolished, its walls dismantled to erase the memory of violence. On the cleared land, a community park was built, a space meant to bring new life and hope where darkness once dwelled. The transformation was symbolic, a chance for the neighborhood to move forward while remembering the lessons of the past. Meanwhile, the legal and social impact of the case rippled outward. Oak Hill officials implemented new training programs focused on recognizing signs of domestic abuse beyond physical injury. Judges and attorneys attended workshops to better understand the psychological toll abuse takes on victims. Claire's case became a catalyst for change, highlighting the need for the justice system to look beyond the surface when assessing guilt or innocence. Books and documentaries followed, exploring the complexities of the Whitmore trial. Some presented Claire as a tragic figure trapped in circumstances beyond her control. Others questioned the limits of the legal defense and the challenges juries face when confronting cases filled with hidden truths. The story sparked debates that crossed cultural and political lines, forcing people to confront uncomfortable questions about privilege, gender, and the nature of violence. At its core, the Perfect Wife case remained a human story, about a woman who once played the part society expected, only to shatter the illusion in the most devastating way. Claire's journey from admired wife to accused murderer, and then to a free woman who chose silence, spoke volumes about resilience, complexity, and the price of hiding pain. In the end, the story didn't offer neat answers or clear justice. Instead, it left behind a haunting reminder. Beneath every perfect image, there may lie secrets waiting to be uncovered, and truths that demand to be heard.